Ladies and gents, it gives me great pleasure to welcome to the red chair at the White Horse, Dr. Michael Murphy. So Michael, I guess a lot of us here would be very much familiar with you on graduation day, seeing your picture in the paper, or maybe some of the attendees here might have been lucky enough to be getting awards and degrees in the last few years. And they see you there in your ceremonial robes and all that kind of stuff. But I have a sense that your job as president of UCC is a lot more than just handing out pamphlets. So give me a sense of what is it exactly that the president of UCC does?
I think I gave you the answer to that some time ago when I recommended a piece in Forbes magazine, November the 15th last year. Toughest CEO job there is, and you won't guess what. And then it told us what it was. And yes, there are lots of different things that one has to do. And it gave a long list there about wisdom and Solomon and the stomach of a goat, because you're eating a lot for the institution. But you are the headmaster, the head of a research institute, you're a restaurateur, you're a hotelier, you're in charge of a health service, you're in charge of buildings and estates, you're in charge of offices on every continent. Give you a sense of it.
Wow. And yeah. Where do you get time to sleep in the middle of that?
My wife would prefer to answer that question.
Okay. We'll get into that later.
Yeah.
Maybe.
It's fairly complex.
Sure.
Yeah.
So if I can bring you back just a few years maybe. So before you were UCC president, give me a sense of when it began to appear on your radar that, you know what, this is a job that could be for me. When was that first moment when
I suppose 5 or 6 years earlier, because I had trained as a doctor back in the 1970s and been in academic medicine and medical research for about 20 years, and came back to UCC from Chicago and did a lot of medical research and provided a clinical service. I hope there are no patients of mine here, at least, well, if they are, they're survivors.
Yeah, that's true.
And I became Dean of Medicine in the year 2000, and there was a fairly big job to be done at that time. But within a couple of years, I felt that I was getting places, getting things done, and that I was enjoying the complexity of that. And so when that term ended, after about 6 or 7 years, I get bored.
Okay.
After about 7 years at anything. And it's a case of up or out. That's the way universities, good universities, operate. And the only way up was into that role, and I felt, well, I had a lot of experience and I felt I could give it a good shot.
Sure.
So that was a thought that built up over about 5 years before it became vacant.
Yeah. And how did those around you feel when you started to say, you know what, I think I might go for this? What kind of reaction were you getting at home?
Never said it to anyone.
Okay. That's probably your first
You
best
don't
move.
do that. The only person who knows that is your wife.
Okay.
It's unlike the Twitters or the tweeters, the Obama and Clinton and whatever. Being popular as university president is not a good objective.
Okay.
Okay, and so it's a process of appointment.
Yeah.
There's no election to it. You're deemed to be competent or a good bet by a large panel of pretty experienced people. So, and it's a very secret process.
Really?
I would not know who my competitors were. I'd have an idea, but formally I wouldn't know who they were. So you don't tell people you're doing this.
And what kind of process were you put through in that selection? Was it something that you had much involvement in, or what kind of thing did you have to do?
There were effectively, you made an application. You set out your track record and you set out what you thought the trajectory of the institution should be. And you then underwent a series of interviews from, I had 3 interviews. The first one was on the 28th of November. Okay. The irony was it was in London and I had to walk across Horse Guards Parade on the 28th of November. And anybody here from Kilmichael knows that that was the anniversary of the ambush and I felt there was a certain irony to this
Yeah,
particular
fair enough.
experience.
Okay. Wow.
So that was the first of
Yeah.
3 fairly long and searching interviews with a lot of psychological assessment content in it,
Okay.
and international expert peers
Wow.
taking a look at you. So that's how it's done.
So presumably you had a set of expectations at that point about what this gig essentially was going to be like, and sitting here as you are now, are those expectations, were they naive? Were they sharp? Like, I mean, what kind of discoveries have you had along the way?
I had lots of discoveries, I can tell you. But I suppose a major one that I had not factored in to the extent that I could or should perhaps was I didn't appreciate the scale of the economic challenge that the country was going to face. And on the day I was appointed, or that I was notified, I went to see my predecessor, Jerry Rickson, and I shook his hand, or he shook my hand, and I said only one thing to him. I said, Jerry, I hope I enjoy the economic wins that you had. So I suppose the fact that I actually said that meant that I knew that there was some trouble ahead,
Right.
but I had no idea the depths of it. And of course that obviously has impacted very much what has been possible to do in the course of my term.
Yeah.
As I say, Napoleon might have looked at me as a bit of an unlucky general in that regard.
Yeah,
Sorry for
maybe.
using those
Well, we
military
won't christen you that
terminology.
yet. But we'll get into some of the active stuff that's going on in UCC and the environs just in a minute. But I'm curious, going back in time, let's say when you were a schoolboy,
Yeah.
as you were looking forward, what did you want to be when you were a young lad?
Well, I didn't want to be a farmer,
Okay.
because I was born on a farm. Some of you may have listened to Cork C103 last night. I had to do a piece on the Yerra, because I was born in the Yerra out near Macroom, or more aptly in Kilmichael. And it was 1950s, and house I was born in didn't have electricity or running water or indoor toilets or any of those kinds of things. And so I suppose as a kid, and looking at what was going on around me, I certainly had an ambition to be somewhere maybe a bit better off than that. Yeah. And so I did. I also had a mother who was very much committed to schooling, and I had uncles and aunts who had been or teachers. So from the outset, I, for some reason, was committed to the books, value of education, and doing better.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably been a feature of how I've looked at life all the way through, being better, doing better, and making opportunities for others to do the same thing, especially in the education space.
So does that explain like why you gravitated towards the medical field then, or what brought you there?
I went from Thomas National School, two-teacher school, to Farn Ferris. I did walk into our medical school about 10 or 12 years ago and began a talk to the staff with the famous statement, well, I went to Thomas National School and it's closed. I went to Farn Ferris for secondary school and it's closed. And I went to UCC for medicine. So we have a job to do here. But I guess there was also a bit of medicine in the family. My father would have said that we were the rake, that he was the rake of the family, and I was aware that I had granduncles and so on who had done medicine. And when I was going through Farn Ferris, there was also the fact that when you were making choices about bettering yourself, certainly at that time, doing medicine was a wonderful career opportunity and life experience opportunity. And I was constantly told by the teachers I'd get the points, or the equivalent. And if you didn't do this, your points are wasted.
Right.
So there was a mixture of being guided in that direction and a family history of it to a degree, and it being a very attractive career pathway. That happened in secondary school and towards the end of it.
And give us a sense of what, in terms of your next stage then, you know, having going through the medical training that you had, and the move then into more of the academic side, the research side, rather than let's say the active practice or whatever? So,
first of all, it's pretty rigorous. It's at that time it was 6 years before you came out into the hospital to be an intern, facing into your 140-hour fortnight, and it was challenging. I by nature, I've always been somebody who questions things. I question truths, and began to ask questions about, well, why are we doing this? Say, in a medical practice, why are we using this drug, or why are we measuring this or that? And again, I'd been academically fairly successful in university, and I've looked at the various options. You could do general practice, geriatrics, this, that, and everything else. I was drawn into the academic sphere because it was an opportunity to test things, to question things, to look for evidence, and that's my personality. And I've beside me here all the documentation that shows from last week's psychological testing of the management team that in fact I have all those traits, and all I've been doing is following my innate programming.
Right.
In all of this.
It's good to hear you're in the right place then, I guess. So give us a sense of, some of that career, and, as you look back on it now, what were there particular moments or achievements that would have given you the most satisfaction in that realm?
Well, I suppose there are two things of which I would be particularly pleased about, and there were things that happened here in Cork. I came back to Cork in 1992 from the University of Chicago, and I remember sitting having a hamburger one day outside the bookstore at lunchtime, and a chap from Iceland asking me the question, what in hell's name are you going back to Ireland for? I mean, what can you do there? You're leaving here. And I said to him that it was my belief that you could actually do in Ireland everything that I was doing in Chicago, and I believed it. And I came back here, and that was my intention, because you're a Corkman, you're from Kilmichael, you were a graduate of UCC. There's a certain stubborn pride in people from this part, and I felt that yes, UCC could do many of the things that were happening in Chicago, but it needed people to come in and roll their sleeves up. And so there were two things I did. One was that in the mid-90s I brought here a very large clinical trial, which would have been about 10 times the scale of anything that was done here before, and put us on an international map at that time. And the second thing I'd be very pleased about is the way in which the College of Medicine and Health has turned out over the past 10 years, because when I came into it, there really had been no change in it in over 100 years. A medical school, a dental school, and that was it. And we've now grown it to, we added 5 or 6 new schools, and we built a whole new infrastructure in Brookfield and a pharmacy school, and it's now a real competitive, internationally competitive College of Medicine and Health Sciences, which you'd be very proud to bring anybody to visit. Sure. And so there are two things that I'd be particularly pleased about.
Well done. So I'm curious, there's two aspects about that I'm very curious about. If that Icelandic chap was sitting with you having the burger outside the place in Chicago 20 years hence, would he have asked such a question? Do you think his perception of Ireland would have changed? Mind
you, his perceptions of life could have changed, because he went on to be a world famous and a multi-millionaire by exploiting. He exploited the genetic code of the whole population of Iceland to find causes of diseases, and set up a company to do it. So he'd be looking at things differently anyway. But there's no doubt that things have changed hugely over the past 20 years, and that Ireland is now a serious player on the map. In academia, in research and education. We're in the top 20 in the world in 18 of our disciplines. So it's a huge transformation.
Brilliant. And the other aspect that fascinated me, and you often hear it coming up in different spheres, is this concept of someone going abroad, gaining experience, and without getting into cliches, being embedded in, let's say, the world class or the best practice stuff, and then coming back and kind of enabling change here. Do you think that's still let's say, a recipe for success in the Irish context?
Absolutely. I get into hot water regularly with the media, but I got into hot water there about 2 or 3 years ago because I gave a graduation speech where I told them all to go away,
okay,
leave the country.
Yeah.
I said, mothers, cover your ears for a moment.
Right, fair enough.
Because I absolutely firmly believe it, that when you live in a small country and you're in a peripheral city of a small island on the periphery of the mainland of a geopolitical mass, you have to get out and see the diversity of approaches, cultures, philosophies, practices, and learn how to do things, then come back here and do them and provide those services out there to the world. But you've got to get out and get experience. And you need to do it at a personal level, that's not just an economic argument or a big social argument.
Yeah.
It's individuals need to have the full experience of diversity. Yeah. And I think it's great.
So when you came back in 92, how different were you to the chap who left a few years hence, or previously?
It depends on who was looking at you.
Okay.
To a lot of people, I would have been a pain in the ass because it would have been this guy coming back, he knows it all, and he never stops talking about how they do things better somewhere else. Eventually they'd say to you, well, go prove it now.
Okay.
So there would be that reaction. Can we live with him?
Yeah.
And then in terms of my own personal reaction, it took a while to readapt to different ways of doing things, different pace, different expectations. I remember in the mid-90s, I thought about, I certainly decided what my autobiography would be, if there ever was one, and I was going to call it Yerra.
Okay.
Okay. Now, most people here know what that means.
Yeah.
Okay. Yerra will be. That was a bit of a challenge at the time. Not as much today at all, but it's not gone.
Yeah.
But there's been a lot of change.
Yeah. Okay. There's a bit of Yerra in all of us, I guess, depending on the context. So give us a sense, today in June 2014, what's keeping you awake in terms of your role as the president? What's
things I can talk about?
Yeah, well, yeah, exactly. Precisely that.
What keeps me awake? It's that we could still be so much better than we are, that there's still a bit of Yerra.
Yeah.
And one thing that is a problem, as I see it, is that the state is still a very serious determinant of what happens in our society. Not as much as before, but the manner to which certainly the education sector and universities are micromanaged by the state is hugely unhealthy. And it's compounded by the fact that over the last 20 years or so, the public service, the civil service, was not a popular destination for the most ambitious, motivated people. And because the public or the civil service has a tendency to promote people without really serious assessment of capacity or competence to fill a role. In other words, people promoted upwards to fill a vacuum. I'm concerned that those who are micromanaging important parts of our society haven't got the competence or capacity to do it. And that creates a whole set of frustrations for those who really are ambitious for the country and who really want to see the country succeed in a whole range of aspects. That's what keeps me awake. The things I'm not allowed to do, though I know full well from 40 years experience and spending a lot of time on the international scene looking at what others do, that we have that mindset and practice within our society.
And what do you think is the most likely path out of that, or how can that evolve successfully, do you think?
I thought that Troika were going to do more for us in that regard. There are a lot of things that they could have done. There are a lot of things that we could do ourselves. And even last week there was a report which I found quite it was positive to a degree. There was a report published on improving accountability and performance in the civil service. But yet when it came to the hard choices, it said, yes, other countries do things differently, but nowhere we won't. So in other words, there's going to be tenure for life, no matter what your capacity or competence or performance. And we're not going to pay people differently for performance or underperformance.
Okay.
Though they acknowledge that practices in other countries are different, there was, without any rationale being given, a choice made to protect the status quo. They're the kinds of things that keep me awake at night, because I know that in the university, or in any of the universities and in many organizations, there are people who have the capacity to add much more value, but they're not allowed to so do.
Yeah.
That's what keeps me awake.
That's right. Fair enough. I'm actually going to give you the full quote that you alluded to earlier, because it's a cracker. It's from a gentleman by the name of Herman Wells, who is a former president of Indiana University. And
Michael D's alma mater.
is that a fact?
Yeah.
No, before he was making tea cozies, as we saw in the picture earlier.
Yeah.
And this is just some, so these were some of the characteristics that he felt a successful university president required, right? And this is just some of it. So it was the cunning of Machiavelli, the wisdom of Solomon, the skin of a rhino, and the stomach of a goat. So I'm glad that you know what a goat eats, because I wasn't clear on whether that was bad. So talk us through the whole kind of rhino skin piece. I mean, do you come under pressure internally and externally, and does it vary? Is it like the weather you talked about in Jerry Rickson's conversation?
It goes with the territory.
Yeah.
Universities are incredible places, and no matter what goes wrong, there will always be two things that cheer you up completely at all times. There's always something. The institution is 120 different businesses, all competing with each other. And you've got very smart people running each of those businesses and competing. There's a challenge, of course, and Dr. Asperger back in 1911 made a statement that there is no genius without a touch of autism. So within the university you have geniuses, and who are appointed for their intellectual aptitudes, but there's a poor correlation between intellectual aptitude and emotional intelligence. So it's also been described as a job herding cats.
Okay.
And they can fight,
yeah.
As Henry Kissinger famously pointed out.
Yeah.
So internally, you have to manage a whole lot of diverse views, all competing for air. And you must encourage that, because that's part of why it succeeds. And anybody who tries to eliminate turbulence from a university is wasting their time. In fact, it's going against the purpose of it. So I came in with a simple policy that I love low-level skirmishing.
Okay.
I love to see it.
Okay.
But it has to be kept below a certain radar. Sure. In the outside world, there is no shortage of criticisms, because the institutions are extremely important to every part of society, and every part of society is looking for the best it can get out of them, also competing for effort and competing for outputs that match their particular needs. And there is at another level a certain fear of universities, because in properly functioning societies, it's a role of a university to hold the mirror up to power, to challenge. And by definition, that gives you a tension then with those with power, whether it be politicians, whether it be media, whether it be business or whatever. So there's a dynamic inside and outside that means that at all times you're in the firing line.
Sure. So if you could flip it around the other way, let's say you're going to a meeting somewhere involving, people who are working for some apparatus of the state. What kind of people would say, oh, geez, here's your man Murphy coming now, he's got stuff he wants? What kind of people would tend to have that here he comes kind of reaction?
Those who have met me before. That's the nature of it. I said at the outset, it's not one's job to be loved, inside or outside. Because if you're loved, you're either doing a fantastic job,
right,
or you're not doing your job.
Yeah.
So you should never go into a job like this to crave popularity or love. You're there to call it as it is,
Yeah.
and do the right job. So a lot of people in government departments mightn't appreciate my knocking on the door some of the times. Some ministers or some media. But that's the nature of the job, and the nature of their job as well, because they also have a very difficult time trying to balance the expectations of people. One thing I would say that's a bit unhealthy about this country that could be better, it's a choice we make, and that is that we have, certainly in my 20 years back here, and particularly in the until Troika time, we operated too much patronage. Who you know rather than what you know. And that's not healthy either for an economy or for a society. And there are choices we make.
Yeah, true.
And sometimes I say nasty things about that kind of stuff.
Keep it up.
It's the job.
Yeah, you said it. So when you spoke earlier about the conversation with Jerry Rickson and the fair weather, it's fair to say that you did actually walk into a fair thunderstorm, and there was a bit of ice and sleet and snow and the whole lot. So the budgetary collapse almost has really changed the game for you guys. So how have you been able to navigate through that period?
It's not been easy. The universities, like a lot of other parts of society, engaged in a bit of irrational exuberance, as Alan Greenspan famously called it. And we built wonderful campuses, which we needed in the 90s and early 2000s. And we spent more than we could afford. And of course, the overhang caught us. It caught us in UCC quite a bit because Jerry had transformed the place. And I was left with a bit of the bill at a time when the capacity to pay the bill was somewhat diminished. But, I mean, we tackled it. And there was a nice heading about 2008, late 2008, where the staff at UCC had agreed to a voluntary pay cut. Unheard of anywhere, but people took seriously the fact that we needed to get knuckled down. Now, as it happened, the scale of the voluntary pay cut paled into insignificance subsequently when compared with the necessary ones. Yeah. But we knuckled down, and I mean it has been absolutely fantastic that through all of it, we've had a 25% cut in our institutional income, and people have had 3 pay cuts and God knows how many tax increases and whatever, and could have gone elsewhere. That people didn't leave. Vast majority of people stayed with us, lost a few, and people knuckled down to the job. And I don't know if that's sufficiently appreciated. An awful lot of our staff could have got jobs in Australia or Canada or United States or the UK or elsewhere over the last 4 years, but they knuckled down, and there was a loyalty to the institution and to the place, and that was one aspect of it. The other, of course, was that we began to focus more on other ways of making money other than relying on the state, pushing harder into international education, pushing into entrepreneurship and spin-outs, into putting on online courses, trying to push the philanthropic endeavour, diversify what we've been doing. So it's a mix of things. Hope that wasn't too long.
So the crisis hasn't been wasted, I guess, is what you're telling me?
No. I hate saying that I used that phrase a few times early on.
Yeah.
No, and we're moving into a better space as a result of it, in that we will be moving out of state dependency. When I started, 86 cents in every euro came from the state somehow, from the exchequer, whether it be in fees or grant or state support for research. That's now down to 61, 62%, and it's going to go below 50, I would expect, in the next 3 to 4 years. And that's healthy. University systems should never be overly dependent on the state, because it then leads to an unhealthy relationship, political relationship, interferences, and so on.
Yeah, fair enough. So you refer to a number of things that have emerged in recent years, but I'm curious, from your perspective, what kind of opportunities are kind of bubbling up on your priority list in terms of the development of the university and the various things that are going on right now?
Some of the things I've just mentioned. For example, we're to a degree an international business. The UCC's international population brings between 40 and 50 million into the Cork economy. And it's our objective to almost double that over the next few years. That's important. The online education, where you don't have to have people coming into your rooms every day, but you're servicing students in Egypt or Tasmania, that's good for the national brand as well as being good for us in bringing in income. Spreading the load. The philanthropy support for higher education in Ireland is very low by international standards. Another area that's extraordinary is that the business sector investment in higher education in Ireland is the second lowest in the OECD. Only Estonia is lower than Ireland in direct investment by business into higher education. So these are all things that are there as opportunities to change the model and, in my view, improve the standing of the I won't call it the business because that's a tricky space, into the future.
The end today. Okay, so are you in the job 5, 6 years more, something like that?
I am there. Who's counting?
I don't know. They'll tell you when the time is up.
7 and a bit, 7 and a half.
Wow.
7 and a half.
So, what do you think you've learned about yourself in that time?
Yes. That I'm not as photogenic as the Forbes article might have.
Yeah.
It's a very difficult question. It's more. I haven't reached certainties in some of it. There are things that I would question a bit. For example, my style was always fairly informal.
Okay.
And yet I have been berated by alumni in places as far away as Melbourne for not behaving more formally. For example, I once appeared apparently on the web without a jacket and tie, and I was berated in Melbourne in a hotel by an alumnus who still didn't accept that I was in Florida when it was taken. It was a breakfast meeting for alumni on a Saturday morning, and they don't do tie and whatever. So I'd question. In a way, it is. I suppose. What have I learned? I've learned that no matter what you do, you will not satisfy everybody, and don't even try. Yeah. That's the most important thing. It goes back to not courting popularity. Yeah. Just doing the job as you see it needs to be done at any point in time.
So, if I was to walk around tomorrow in UCC and ask 10 of the more senior people in different organisations, functions and so on, how would you describe Michael's leadership style? What kind of things would they be saying? Going for the sort of
what did it say?
Yeah.
I fall into the assessor, developer, explorer, promoter, thruster, organizer, creator, innovator. That's the end of the spectrum.
Lineup,
okay?
yeah.
I most certainly am not a controller or an inspector. I don't do micromanagement. I'm not a maintainer or an upholder. In other words, status quo doesn't interest me. I get bored. I don't do the job as a reporter / advisor. In other words, that I give my opinion without intent. So they would be the descriptors. Then they will add in the pieces that where there are consequences, such as that I'm interested in the new ideas, and I'm interested in I'm more into complex than simple. I'm bored easily. I drive them crazy because there's a fairly high expectation of performance and delivery. That tells me it all in there.
Yeah.
And so, the nice thing would be he's got plenty of ideas. And the nasty part of it would be, and the price for us is.
Okay, yeah. So there's a tax to be paid.
Yeah, and there always is.
Yeah.
As I said, again, popularity is not the name of the game.
Yeah. So if you're, I think my maths is right here, if you're saying 7+ years, right, it's a 10-year stint, isn't that right?
No parole mentioned in the Act.
No. So when your term is over, how would you like to be remembered?
Well, there are a couple of things to say. I mean, all organizations go through cycles. And, of course, being counter-cyclical is the real trick. But they are cyclical. I did come into UCC, into this role, as you alluded to earlier, at a time of significant turbulence. In fact, there had been about 15 years of rather challenging internal politic. And I set out to restore functionality, particularly in leadership and in the governance and management of it, professionalizing it, making sure there was absolute clarity about what these different things meant, and so that people knew how things work transparently, how they could get things done, elimination of patronage, and doing my best to reward good performance. So the culture for me was a hugely important part of the agenda when I started, and I think, touch wood, in the remaining period, I hope that that will be sustained and that I brought about changes that will sustain it for a considerable period. And beyond that, I would have to say that notwithstanding the most challenging economic environment of 75 to 100 years, that we kept the ship moving forward, performing very well and world-class standards in some parts. And thirdly, that I did some things to increase the understanding of people of what the role of UCC is, and that is, it's a university of a region, connecting the region to the globe. I use that strapline because I felt that we were too internally focused, and that we needed to have better connectivity with the society that we're serving. So they were three things that I would look back and say, I hope that they reflect what happened.
I'm curious, as you were describing that actually, that, you know, given that our group here, our audience, our network and so on, are essentially business people.
Yeah.
From your position as you see, you know, looking out at the business community, what kind of behaviours would you like to see from us in terms of getting the most out of what, you know, the university can offer in terms of like partnership or synergies or whatever? But what kind of posture or behaviour would you like the business community to adopt?
The first thing I say is that the university has to pay great attention to the needs of business, but not solely to the needs of business by any means. But we need to make sure that our graduates are what you might call fit for purpose. But to know what the business community's view is of fitness for purpose is a challenging thing. There was a famous statement made a long time ago about the challenge that an American president has in calling Europe. If he wants to call Europe, what number does he call? There are just so many different sectors, and they each have so many different demands and expectations that are not all consistent, and they're competing with each other. And what I find at the moment is that it is difficult to engage in a structured way and an efficient way with the business sector so that we can have the kinds of dialogue that would be most impactful. That's not to say we're not having great chats with individual companies and to some degree with subsets of sectors. But I've been trying to engage with IBEC and then Chamber of Commerce locally to put in place a more effective way of communicating between us rather than headlines in the Sunday newspapers.
Sure.
And that's, if we got that dealt with, I think we could then add a lot of value to the whole endeavour.
Brilliant. We're nearly out of time, but I have a couple of questions for you. if you could assume a superpower and don a cape to solve any problems that the world needs solving, which superpower would you pick?
I don't know where you got that question now, but one of my favourite headings in the newspapers over the last 7.5 years was in the Daily Mail. It was the morning after I had to resuscitate the father of one of our graduates at a ceremony, a cardiac arrest. And the heading was, when Superman goes to work, he puts his cape on. When UCC chief goes, he takes his cape off.
A great headline.
So
yeah,
that was not the lead, and I take it to your question. I mean, given that psychological profile there's only one answer to the question, and that is benevolent dictatorship.
Okay. Works most effectively now.
But a more serious way of putting it would be that, going back to what I said earlier about the unhealthy relationship between the state and the university sector in Ireland, particularly at the present time, I would say that I would just love to have the management toolkit that my university in Chicago had when I was there 20 years ago, or that a Dutch university has, or a British university, or a German university. The freedom to do things, of course, in a measured fashion and in a very appropriate fashion, to reward good performance, the opposite for bad performance, and things of those nature. In other words, a toolkit to manage to international standards. If we had that, we'd be world beaters.
Fantastic.
So real world beaters.
I see you more as a superhero that has one of those belts with all the different tools in them rather than a guy with a cape. Obviously, then it would be more, well, this is important to 3-year-old boys. And my last question, given that here we are sitting in the end of June 2014, who do you think is going to win the World Cup?
If I admitted to knowing anything about the World Cup, I wouldn't be doing my job, would I? From what I've seen, I'd say Costa Rica could give people a good run for their money.
Oh. That's back in a
I always
back
the small guys like ourselves from Cork.
You never know. We could be looking at this video in a year from now saying, not only has he got all these things going for him, but he's also prophetic.
There's one thing I would say to you, by the way, that I use every opportunity. By the way, next year is a fantastic year for Cork and Ireland, and UCC in particular, of course, because one of the most important scientists who ever lived was our professor of mathematics in the 1850s, George Boole. If Boole hadn't written his algebra, you wouldn't have the internet, your smartphone, your iPad, or whatever you were playing with over there. He is one of the two grandfathers of the computer age. And we have a huge opportunity next year in Cork, in UCC, to send the message out there that Boole was professor of mathematics in Cork. And people should take note. Great things have happened here and happen here all the time. And if this is going out on the web, I think it's important that people out there should know that next year is going to be a big year for us.
Brilliant. Bring it on.
Yeah.
Ladies and gents, Bula Boss for Dr. Michael Murphy.